Good evening, good afternoon. It is morning here in Wisconsin in the USA. It is getting cold out, but it's the end of Cybersecurity Month, and let's talk about some stuff. Let's talk about that. None of that stuff should keep us from talking about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a global thing, and I welcome our friends from EMEA. If there's any APAC folks still up, it's evenings over there. I don't know. Welcome to everyone, and I'm glad you could join us. I am Bob Plankers. I'm a senior technical marketing architect with the VMware Corporation, and it's my pleasure to do vSphere security stuff. I talk about vSphere security stuff all the time. I do the security configuration guide. I took that over from a guy named Mike Foley, who you may remember. If not, well, that's cool. So let's get started. We've got a bunch of stuff here. I'm trying to make this about 20 minutes long. It's going to be a little longer than that. I added some slides to it last night. So yeah, let's get a move on. Oh, my thing is there. There we go. So 5 ways to keep attackers out. That's kind of a dramatic sort of thing to say, but it's true. You know, we want to be able to keep the bad people out of our environments while still using them. And so let's talk about some of that here. Let's talk about how we're going to do that. This is, like I said, this is the fourth, it's Cybersecurity Month. This is the fourth talk. The other three, or last 3 weeks, they're all up live on YouTube. And so if you want to catch up with them, I think the only glitch was one of them. I let the stream. This has been a learning process for me as well. I've never done live streaming before, so I really thank you all for joining me. And yeah. So to start with, and I've said this on a few other ones, I always like pointing out a couple of things. And one, security is a process. It's not a product per se. It's really a way of thinking. This is a quote from Bruce Schneier back in the year 2000. He's an American cryptographer, and his blog, his blog is great. I was reading his blog last night, in fact, and he's got good stuff and salient points continuing on here. But he wrote this nice thing about how security is a process. It's a way of thinking, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here too, because it's a way of making decisions. It's a way of thinking about a problem, thinking about an approach to things. And so I always like mentioning that, because it's not a set of tools necessarily. It's not a bunch of nerd knobs. It's a CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Each one of those three things is very important to security. And so, yeah, we need to think about all of those things simultaneously. The other big thing that weighs on our mind lately here is ransomware. There's been a lot of talk about ransomware. Ransomware is the boogeyman, the boogeyman that we kind of need to kick our duff into gear here around a lot of the security stuff, and to improve our lives. And that, the situations change, security changes. It's an arms race in many cases. Ransomware is people. The initial infection might be a bot, might be malware loaded from a USB drive that somebody picked up, whatever, but realistically it's people after that. And they do a darn good job of inventorying your network. You almost kind of wish you could buy the inventories from them, and if they just sold penetration tests. It's a wonderful penetration test. Unfortunately, they're looking to make money off of you because they're going to hold your data hostage and your systems hostage. And that's not cool. I do love the VMware. This is the official VMware icon for ransomware, the skull. And I kind of like it, especially with Halloween coming up here in the US and things. Other things I like talking about, and I mentioned this, security. Security is always a trade-off. And I like the Spinal Tap reference. If you've ever seen the movie Spinal Tap, turn it to 11. There's a lot of people that think that security is... we should turn it to 11. We'll do all the security, and then we'll be secure. And that's not true. That's not true at all. And so finding a balance, security is also a trade-off. It's often a trade-off between security and usability, but we trade off opportunity cost. What else could we be doing instead of maintaining the security controls that we added? Things like that. And so there's a balance there for all organizations, and it's not the same. So I always like to caution people against that. And so all of my comments will be in light of these things. This talk is intended to be ideas. Not, you don't have to go stop everything and do all of them, but ideas. The next time you encounter a situation or you're rebuilding something or whatever, you can make it better. And I'd like planting the seeds, planting these ideas in your heads. So let's get on with it. Number one, it's 2020. Isolation, we do a lot of isolation now, like thanks coronavirus. But the in seriousness, protecting ourselves with isolation is great for the data center as well. Creating checkpoints. It needs to be somewhat flexible. The old style castles and moats and walls and things like that. We need some of those. But we need to be able to protect ourselves flexibly, working from home and things like that as well. And so the some thoughts around that. This is a giant wall of words, and I apologize for it. Like there's a quote. I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have time. Sort of thing, like simplifying thing is actually really hard, and we see that with my slide here, all these words, but also with our infrastructures too. Simplifying it is actually really, really difficult, and simplifying it without being clever too. So anyhow, let's talk about this. VLANs, the virtual LANs, the idea that we can carve a network segment up into different logical domains that have hard borders on them, that different things can exist in, and traffic can't pass between them except through a router and things like that. And so what VLANs do we need, or what separate NICs do we need? Hardware management, ILOs, iDRACs, Lenovo X something or other. I don't know. I'm more of a Dell guy, just 23 years out in enterprise IT. I've been using Dell, and so Dell and HP. But so don't take it personally. But the hardware management side of things needs its own isolation. It's got its own capabilities, and we can isolate it. A lot of times there's out-of-band network connections that we can make for that as well. And so keeping that separate is important. Hypervisors should be on their own. And whether you put vCenter server in with the hypervisors or not is a design decision, and it'll come out to a few other things we'll talk about here. Some of our guidance suggests that, some does not. If you've got a lot of people accessing it, you might create a separate VLAN for virtualization management is what I like calling it. vCenter server, vRealize Operations Manager, and your other stuff that sort of the not a DMZ, but things that are more publicly accessible than the hypervisors themselves. vSAN, give it its own best practices to give it its own VLAN, give it its own network segment. Do that. vMotion, same way. vMotion can be encrypted now, and we definitely recommend that. But keeping it on its own network segment is still the classic advice, and we still hold by it. Storage. Who can get to your storage? Can you isolate your storage? Can you isolate NFS, iSCSI, things like that? Fiber channel SANs. Fiber channel SANs are not immune to this sort of thing, but they're more of a black box, and so learning about how they do things and who can see what is important. But then you can also do this for workloads as well. Take your workloads and you can isolate them, like your Active Directory. Active Directory is the core of a lot of our IT operations, and it's a great target for attackers, and especially with vulnerabilities like zero logon, which are really scary. If you didn't patch zero logon and like the first 24 hours it was out, you should really check to see how many extra domain admin accounts you have, because that was a privilege escalation. That was scary. We'll talk a little bit more about that in, I think, items 3 or 4 here. Good borders. Some of these things you might not need to route the traffic for. And vSAN, vMotion, do you need those interfaces to talk off of that network at all, or is it just inside the cluster itself? And if it's just inside the cluster itself, don't make it routable. The best way to firewall something is just not to have it even talk at all. Does your whole company? One of the things that's a consideration here is consoles, VM consoles. VM consoles require a connection from the console client, web client, VMRC, VMware Workstation, whatever you're using, back to ESXi itself. And that's tricky, because it's actually going back through the management interfaces of ESXi. My suggestion, there's a lot of people that are worried about it. You can put it back in, that's the new port 443 methods. You can put it back in the 902 methods, which are, older and more legacy, but I would actually just approach it. Does your whole company need access to the VM consoles? If you had a physical data center, would you let the whole company come in to that physical data center to use the consoles of the physical servers? No, you wouldn't. And you probably don't. They probably don't need console access like that. So keeping them completely out of vCenter server just eliminates a whole lot of management issues, management structure, all of that stuff. Aside from just improving security. Watch ILO and iDRAC backdoors. They can present a USB, and I think the other ones can as well. Again, familiar with one type of these things. The ILO and iDRAC backdoors, they can present a USB NIC there. And so all of a sudden, if you've got a hardware management network and you've got a hypervisor network, and you've got a device in there that's bridging the two or could bridge the two, or you've got a path around it, you're going to hear me say this a few times. Good fences make good neighbors. And so get rid of that. You can do all your management, all that stuff without that, and without the software installed on ESXi as well. Not saying it's bad, but just, think about anything you install on ESXi is additional attack surface. It's an additional thing to manage. At the very least, you're decomplicating your life by thinking about removing it. Consider a VPN. Actually, a design that I've used in the past is VPNing into the management interfaces, not into the management interfaces, but into securing, having a really hard border around the management interfaces for an environment. And then actually using a VM on a workstation to VPN into those environments in order to manage them. It can be a big pain in some ways, but it's actually fairly liberating in other ways. You've got nice isolation there, logical isolation. You can put two-factor authentication on that VPN and gain that, especially for devices like network switches and things like that that really can't do MFA. That sort of thing, and something to think about. Again, just planting seeds. And then monitoring the borders. How do you know that you're not being attacked? Are you actually watching it? Are you getting reports about it? Are you getting reports? The tricky thing is, if somebody steals credentials and you're just monitoring for failures of logins and things like that, then, how would you know? You need to monitor the successes as well, and that's really the tricky part. And then on the physical side of things, who can get to your servers? I had an auditor once, and this was a great auditor. I've actually enjoyed working with a number of the compliance auditors that I've dealt with, that just stuck his arm in the side of our rack. There's a big hole there for cables to go through, but his arm fit as well, and you can just unplug stuff. And how would you know? Would you know if somebody did something? Would you know if somebody reached up and plugged in something to a top of rack switch? How would you know? Are you using Secure Boot on your servers? Secure Boot helps catch malware if if they can reach in and put a USB key in one of your physical servers and install malware. How would you know? Well, Secure Boot will catch that. It uses cryptographic techniques to validate the bootloaders and all the drivers and things like that. And so you want to turn that on. TPMs, if you're buying new hardware, a lot of stuff is going to need TPMs moving forward. Even Microsoft is requiring TPMs moving forward to be certified for Windows. We're not doing that. We're not as hardcore about that, but we're doing a lot with TPMs. TPMs are a great secure enclave to store secrets and things like that, and we're going to use those a lot moving forward. They're $30-$40 if you're buying new servers. Actually, you can retrofit your servers as well with them. Don't buy them used. They're cryptographically bound to the first host that they're installed in. You'll see them used all the time. You can buy a ton of them on eBay. Don't. The resellers have no idea. It's not malicious. They just have no idea. Disabled unused USB and NICs. It goes without saying. What information do you display on the LCD? I said this is a process, right? A way of thinking about this sort of stuff. And so are you giving information? Are you leaking information out on the LCD there that an attacker could use to attack yourself? And last, on this whole mess of stuff here, bezel locks. Everyone's got the key to bezel locks. Bezel locks are not secure. In fact, it's been my experience of bezel locks. You will lose the keys if you use the bezel lock. You will lose the key when you need it the most, and then now you've got two problems, And so, try not to use those. Use rack locks and things like that. A couple of photos, a couple of screenshots. I did want to point out, the isolation between the my lab is set up like a small business or a medium-sized business, actually. And so this is how my lab is set up. I've got different VLANs for different things. And actually with the distributed virtual switch, you can do traffic filtering and marking is the feature. You can actually do firewalling. It's sort of a basic interface for the firewalling, but this can all be automated with Power CLI and things. You can actually set up firewall rules at the port group level. And if you've got multiple, you can have multiple port groups on the same VLAN too, with multiple different types of firewalling and that. So it's pretty flexible, and we often overlook this. And so one of my things, I get hot on a vSphere feature. This is my thing for October here, is pointing out that we can use this, and well, we can use it to help our situations. This is the iDRAC pass-through, not to throw Dell under the bus. I think they make great products, but I would shut this off. By default, it comes as USB NIC, and to me that's a little scary because it's just another route through, and that. I should mention, if you've got any questions, comments, thoughts, put them out in the live chat. If you're watching this after the fact, and you've got questions or comments, reach out to me on Twitter. I'm just Plankers, Plankers, one who planks. So yeah, throw it out in the chat if you've got questions, and we can get to them right. I'll stop at the end and see. Second, reduce attack surface. Seems straightforward. Biggest thing, shut SSH off. I've been saying this for a while. It's really important. ESXi is not a multi-user operating system. It's not Linux. Compliance scanners love to think it's Linux, and they will fall into the SSH thing. It's not Linux. It's not a multi-user operating system. You're not going to be checking your email on it. You're not going to be using Firefox on it. It's purpose-built for virtualization. And the dirty secret is, and it's not really a secret, and it's not really dirty either, that's a troubleshooting interface. SSH is a troubleshooting interface. It's meant for support. Anybody who logs into that thing is basically root. And there's not a permission model there because it's not intended to be multi-user. Anyone who's logging into that interface, because it's a support interface, they've got permission to it. It's like the service hatch on like a manhole or a telecommunications tunnel or something like that. If you get in there, you've got access to everything, right? Same thing with SSH. ESXi is a toaster, and SSH is the cleaning hatch on the bottom. You can see this is my toaster, about 30 feet that direction. And can you do stuff through this interface? Yeah, sure. I can cram bread up in there. Is it wise to do that? Depends on your goals in life. If you like meeting the fire department, hey, go for it. My fire department here is great, but I like meeting them not under duress. Yeah, using it as intended. Shut that door, shut SSH off, shut the shells off. Don't leave them open for attackers to hit and have access to your environment in ways that you don't want. Drive people into vCenter server, the role-based access control there. There's great logging. That's really where the management should be. And if you need SSH, yeah, and sometimes you need SSH. And this, I'm often speaking here about vSphere 7. vSphere 7's got great API coverage. vSphere 6.7 had something like 60% API coverage. It's like 98 or 99% in vSphere 7. And so that helps immensely. So when you come up to 7, this is something to think about too. Or with 6.7, you can just use it tactically. Use a Power CLI script to shut it off and turn it back on again. I'll tell you, it really does help with compliance as well. The biggest thing on compliance audits is SSH is on. Hey, we found all this stuff. There's an etc password on ESXi, and it's got the wrong permissions. Yeah, because it's not a Linux box. It's there for legacy stuff. You know, you want to help your audits as well? Shut SSH off. And if anybody gives any grief about it, we deliver from VMware by default. SSH is off, disabled, and firewalled off as well. And so that's the best practice. That's the default state. Put it back there. Seriously. Other thoughts here? Shut SSH off. Yeah, don't dismiss the warnings. If it's really easy to click the dismiss button on the warnings. I want to remove that in the product. I've asked to do that. We'll see if that happens. The security configuration guide, the new version 7, is out. It came out with the vSphere 7 update 1, and it does actually check for whether you've dismissed the warnings or not, and that would be a finding if you did. And so the other thing I'll say is normal lockdown mode. Normal lockdown mode is nice because it'll prevent shells and SSH from being used and from the ESXi console. But unlike strict lockdown mode, where if you lose contact with vCenter server, you're really stuck until you fix vCenter server, normal lockdown mode, you can actually go to the console, you can shut it off if there's an emergency. So it's actually a really nice step forward to kind of get used to the idea of not using the consoles. I mentioned the SCG, the Security Configuration Guide 7. I created 4 tabs now. And we've got guidance for ESXi, vCenter, and this is evolving. So check back. I need to release a new version coming up here. There's been some feedback about this, and if you do have feedback, I really appreciate it. If you read the document, there's a Word document that comes in the kit with it, and it's got how to give me feedback. Basically, send me an email. So, number 3, reduce trust. Who do your trusts trust? Is one big question. Your storage arrays. You're trusting your storage arrays to do the right thing. Are they doing the right thing? Hard to say. How often do your trusts patch? That's a big question. We trust Active Directory quite a bit. Did Active Directory? Did they patch for zero login right away, or are we still waiting in a 60-day change window or change freeze or something like that? If you haven't patched for zero logon, you've got problems now. We need to be on top of this thing. Are those folks on top of it? Also, more operationally oriented here, what happens when your trusts are offline? When Active Directory, something's wrong with it, or as I discovered once, somebody put our primary DNS servers, the authoritative DNS servers, inside of the virtualization and one of my virtualization environments that depended on it. And you only catch this stuff when there's an outage, right? And now you've got 2 problems. Instead of just the outage, whatever the problem was to start with, you've got additional stuff. And that's where the term shaving a yak comes in. Look that up if you're not familiar with it. It's a really interesting term. But good fences make good neighbors. That goes for trusts or dependencies. We should work to reduce those. A couple of things. Don't use Active Directory for authentication and authorization. Are you using an Active Directory group called like vSphere admins to determine who gets into your infrastructure? If you're doing it that way, anybody who's got access to privileged access to Active Directory can add themselves to that group. And I've heard stories from lots of people about well-meaning folks Active Directory admins adding themselves to that group and logging in. I've also heard stories about attackers doing that with a compromised account. Don't do it that way. Use an SSL group. Is it a little extra work? It's a little extra work, but you can get those Active Directory domain accounts into an SSO group, and then you're in control of who's in that group. And then the attackers need to compromise one of your specific accounts, not just some random AD account and add themselves. They need to compromise the Bob Plankers' account or whoever's your particular account. And anytime you make it harder for them to move laterally, is what we call it, moving laterally in an environment, you increase the chances that you'll catch them doing bad things. And so who else has access to your storage? The vSAN and storage guys. Talk to them once in a while. And they've seen some ransomware where there's been a backup system that's had an iSCSI mount open or a There's been an NFS mounted file share that's been mounted on a Linux box or something like that that was unprotected, and it was being used as a data store by vSphere, and next thing you know, it's got ransomware because that backdoor path, that alternate path in wasn't secured, and so who else has got access to your storage? The fiber channel is a little more arcane, but are all of the is all the masking correct? Are all of the permissions correct? There, it's worth auditing, worth checking, worth questioning. Is your storage, or are your storage arrays using AD for authentication and authorization as well? Chances are the answer is yes. Are your iDRACs doing it? It's so easy to do that. We don't think about the consequences for what happens if Active Directory is compromised. And Active Directory, again, is a huge target. Somebody gets in there, they can control your DNS, DHCP, well, maybe not NTP, but time can come through Active Directory as well. Certificate authorities, they can compromise that. KMS is usually separate, but it's worth thinking about all these things. What happens if it's compromised? How can we isolate ourselves from that so that the problem doesn't spread, that it doesn't spread to the infrastructure itself? Last thing is backup systems. I really like I like a lot of vendors. There's a lot of great backup vendors. Veeam actually has it in their guidance that their backup system should not be attached to your Active Directory. It should be air-gapped from an authentication perspective. And that's really good advice, because if somebody can get into your backup systems, and that's the play with ransomware, you try to infect things slowly so that it gets caught by backups so that you don't have a good backup point. And so considering air gaps, considering how attackers might get there is really important. Something that I really like this book. I bought it 20 years ago. It's really old, and I'm sorry to Steve McConnell, the author, that I might be calling him old. We're all getting old, but page 80 is the best as far as a system design perspective. The loose coupling, page 80 and 81. I didn't put 81 here. You can buy the book. It's downloadable. This is a PDF that I bought, and but the loose coupling, the idea that we're holding what does it say? Loose coupling means designing so that you hold connections among different parts of a program to a minimum. Replace programming. You might say, oh, this is software development. Works great for the for system design as well. Keeping connections to a minimum and really considering how those work, really important. Minimal complexity, ease of maintenance. Who doesn't want ease of maintenance? I'd like it to be complicated, please. Yeah, said no one ever. Well, let's fly through the rest of this. It's pretty straightforward. Good authentication, number 4. Multi-factor authentication is really important. I always love this Spaceball quotes. The vSphere Security product manager and I use this all the time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have the same combination on my luggage. And passwords, we need to get away from them. We've got stuff on our roadmap for better stuff with ESXi, things like that. Identity federation, bringing that pretty much everywhere inside of vSphere is our goal. But we started with vCenter Server. vCenter Server can now participate in ADFS-based multi-factor authentication. Even if you don't do multi-factor authentication, it can do ADFS and things like that. And so, but all the MFA tools plug into ADFS, so it's a great way to get those installed in your environment, and to use what your corporation uses as well. It offloads some stuff. So works great. I've got it running in my lab. I'm not going to do a demo. We don't have enough time for that. But as far as authentication goes, we talked about shutting SSH off. Use the role-based access control. It's, that permission model is robust. Use it. You will need root and administrator every once in a while. For upgrades and updates and things like that. Just plan for it. How are you going to rotate that password? Anytime you check that password out, you should change it, is what it amounts to. And there's some automated ways to do that now. Just plan for it. Like we can accept our fate, or we can try to deny our fate. But if we accept it, then we can move on. Monitor logins, both successes and failures. We talked about this. And then the last thing, honestly, I always talk about patching, updating, and upgrading. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I will say that ransomware sits there waiting for an opportunity. and it waits for, it's sitting there quietly until there's a 0 day, zero log on, some other vulnerability, and then they can pounce. They've got databases of all the vulnerabilities in your network, and so all they have to do is query their database for all of their infections everywhere to see who they can attack using this 0 day. Who's running this? Who's running Active Directory? We can attack them, and then all of a sudden your infection goes from little, boom, to big. A lot of excuses for not patching and things like that. But the thing that I've been saying lately is if it cannot be patched during business hours, it's not going to survive. It's not going to respond well to a real failure. You're not going to have a good time during a real failure. And so patching is just, it's a scheduled failure, right? It's a scheduled outage, scheduled small outage. You should be able to do it. Ideally, you should be able to do it during business hours. Have everything continue working just fine, and life goes on, and again, it's a process, and so working towards that should be the goal. But if you need to justify it, availability is a big part of security too. This is a customer that I've worked with, and they maintain a vSphere 4.1 instance, mostly as a hobby. They sent me, this was probably 200 days ago now that they sent me the screenshot, 2,777 days, plus they're probably, in the 2,900s or 3,000s at this point, so which is crazy. But when's the last time these got patched? Uptime wars are not cool anymore. We're done with those. My last slide here for funny stuff, DA667 on Twitter had a bunch of these a while back, and I saved them, and I've always been wanting to use this. I mentioned change freezes. Attackers love change freezes, honestly, and so we need to be more flexible than that. I'm not saying don't plan. Planning is important, but being flexible is important as well. So let's recap. If you've got anything, you're welcome for the advice in the chat. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. If you're watching after the fact, again, just reach out if you've got questions and that. But let's recap a little bit. Recap in sort of a snarky manner. There's a million ways to isolate. We need to be better about it, all of us. I need to be better about it. You need to be better about it. Our grandmothers need to be better about it. Everybody needs to be better about it. And I hate that 2020, it's all about isolation, but it is what it is, right? Second thing, shut SSH off. It's not a multi-user OS. Use the APIs, use vCenter server. Send your logs out somewhere else too and monitor them, Step number 3, this seems sad. The things that you trust will let you down. So if you don't have to trust them, don't. Dependencies, this gets into philosophical and therapist territory here, But the less you can depend on things in a vSphere environment, the better off you'll be from an availability perspective. MFA via Identity Federation is absolutely fantastic. It's worth bringing, and the upgrade to vSphere 7, the upgrade to vCenter Server 7 was seamless for me in the couple of times that I've done it now. I'm really excited about it. The possibilities there. Coming up to 7, it's easy. Do it. You get all kinds of stuff. IWA, by the way, is deprecated. Integrated Windows Authentication. Speaking of good fences make good neighbors. That was just the domain joins and all that stuff. Not clean APIs, and it's deprecated. It'll be around in 7, but the next major release will not be there. So might be time to think about something new anyhow. And then last, ransomware. Again, waiting for a 0-day exploit, and it will exploit it faster than you will patch, faster than I will patch, and we need to be better about it. So that is it. I don't see anything out in the chat right now. I will wait for a couple minutes here and see if anybody's got any ideas, but that's pretty much it. I thank you. I thank you for the support all throughout this month. Go out to our YouTube channel for the recordings of all of these things. We've also got some other stuff out there that's really interesting. Information about vSphere 7, things like that. Our blog, blogs.vmware.com/vSphere. Us technical marketing folks, we merged with our vSAN and VMware Cloud Foundation peers. we all came together this last summer here, and we're creating a new site called core.vmware.com, core.vmware.com, where we're putting a lot of technical information. And so that's a really great resource as well. I should have probably just put a QR code here, but live and learn. So I don't see anything out in the chat, and you're welcome for the content. Please go back and watch the rest. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Take care.